So did you know that Donald Trump was deposed on camera in the context of a lawsuit, and you can watch that entire deposition on YouTube? Chances are, if you didn't know that, it's because that deposition did not get the requisite degree of publicity because people interested in that deposition did not get what they wanted out of it. Viva Frei, Montreal litigator turned YouTuber, another day on lockdown, another car vlog. And this one is interesting because if I'm not overtly political on social media, I nonetheless follow politics and have a political side to me. And being interested in politics with an acute peak in my level of interest around the 2015-2016 presidential election time in the United States, I was very surprised to realize and learn that there was an entire deposition of Donald Trump on the internet. And I said to myself, if someone like me who was relatively interested and involved in politics was not aware of this, chances are it's because people who conducted that examination or the other powers that be out there did not get what they wanted out of that examination. And I started watching this deposition, and I quickly realized after about 5 or 10 minutes that there was going to be no bombshell in this deposition. There was going to be no bombshell. Presumably there was no gotcha moment where Donald Trump said something absolutely devastating that the media could then run with. As opposed to another now infamous deposition of the name that cannot be spoken on social media, which lasted over 3¼ hours long, and from which the media drew a 3-second soundbite on the basis of some form of self-declared psychosis. The fact that this deposition ultimately just disappeared into the internet ether is a sign that nothing radical came out of this deposition. I nonetheless watched this entire deposition to see how much of a dud this deposition could be, and admittedly I was entering into it with the perspective that it was in fact going to be a dud. I think from the substantive legal perspective, this deposition was in fact a dud and was expected to be a dud given who they were examining and what his knowledge would be on the substance. But I think from a media perspective, this deposition was in fact a surprising dud in that nothing came out of it. That said, I did nonetheless find the deposition to be very interesting, and I'm going to walk you through some of the highlights of the deposition right now. But first, the 30,000-foot overview of the substance of the underlying lawsuit. The 30,000-foot overview is that Trump was planning another luxury hotel in the old post office on Pennsylvania Avenue and was looking for people to fill the restaurant. The Trump development team apparently entered into a lease with Jeffrey Zakarian, and if you don't know who Jeffrey Zakarian is, you need to watch a little Food Network. Jeffrey Zakarian is a chef or restaurateur. He's got an amazing reputation in the industry. So the Trump team enters into a lease agreement with Chef Zakarian sometime in 2015, and after Trump makes some, let's just call them controversial public remarks, Chef Zakarian wants to back out of the deal because he no longer wants to be associated with Trump. Now, whether or not you agree or disagree with Trump's public comments, whether or not you think they are in fact controversial or not controversial at all, Chef Zakarian thought that they were sufficiently controversial such that he no longer wanted to be associated with the project. And so Zakarian sought to back out of the lease, basically cancel the lease, and disassociate himself from Trump's project. For their side, the Trump team says, we have a binding lease agreement. You can't just back out of it for comments I made in a different context that have nothing to do with this project. We're going to sue you for damages. Trump sued Zakarian for damages for breach of contract. Zakarian apparently cross-claimed. They eventually settled their suit. This is not about the lawsuit itself. This is just about the deposition. In the context of that lawsuit, depositions were held, depositions, discoveries, examinations, however you want to call them, and Donald Trump's deposition was made public shortly thereafter. And it is, in fact, a very interesting deposition to watch from a litigation perspective, from a human perspective, and from a legal perspective. So let's just go through some of the highlights together, shall we?
The court reporter today is Debbie Whitehead, representing Planet Depos. Would the reporter please swear in the witness?
Can you raise your right hand?
Yes,
Do you swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Would you state your full name for the record, please?
Donald John Trump.
And I imagine you've had your deposition taken a number of times.
Yes.
So you know the drill, and
I do.
won't waste anyone's time going through it.
Good.
What'd you do to prepare for the case today, for the deposition?
I would say virtually nothing.
Do you make notes? Do you have anything on paper related to this case?
No, I don't.
Now, the first thing I noticed, as did a lot of other people, as could be seen from the comment section where this entire deposition was posted on YouTube, is people commenting on Trump's demeanor. People commenting on the fact that he's folding his arms, that he's hunched over and therefore closed off, that he's not such a big mouth now, is he, etc., etc. And reading these comments, I'm like, yeah, of course he's not. This is a deposition. This is not a fireside chat. In the deposition, Trump confirms that he has in fact been deposed numerous times in the past, and I have no reason to doubt him. I take for granted he has been deposed on numerous occasions. He knows the rules of the game. The person being deposed in a deposition has nothing to gain from that deposition. They are not going to convince opposing counsel that their client is wrong and that the witness is right. There's nothing they can say that is going to score them points in the deposition. There are only things they can say that are going to hurt them. It is not the time to be loosey-goosey, chatty. It is the time to be shut off from the person asking the questions. You don't elect information to the examining attorney. You don't answer questions that they haven't asked. You are not friends with the examining attorney. And so people thinking that his folded arms and slouched over, closed off self-demeanor is a sign of guilt, it isn't a sign of guilt. It is actually just a sign of how to conduct an examination. Do not get chatty with opposing counsel. And even though I say that, Trump does in fact get a little chatty with opposing counsel, he does seem to ignore the objections of his own attorney. But we'll get there. This was just my opening observation. Depositions are not fireside chats.
I think your daughter told me in her deposition that you don't email, and I observed that that's because you're a very smart person.
Yes, we've figured that out. It took a lot of people a long time to figure that out.
Now, there is getting chatty in a manner that can hurt you, and there is getting chatty in a manner that will not hurt you. And this is one of those examples of getting chatty in a manner that will not hurt you. And when I say that as a rule, the witness should not elect information because more often than not, it will not come back to help them, every now and again, the witness can offer what I call the leitmotif, a recurring theme throughout the examination where the witness can offer information that has not been requested by the examining attorney if it's going to help their case. And this comment by Trump is bordering on one of those situations. It's not going to hurt Trump's case, and it's not going to hurt Zakarian's case, but it is not made for the purposes of this case. It is made for the purposes of the case of public opinion in the context of the 2016 elections, because Trump knows, sure as sugar, this deposition, if it's not going to be leaked, it's going to be disclosed. And while the media is going to be scouring this deposition for sound bites that are going to hurt Trump, he can offer some that he can use for his own political purposes. And that was one of them. But this video is not going to be all about the underlying politics of this deposition, so let's get into the actual law side of it.
What do you know about this case? What's your understanding of this case, other than anything your lawyers told you?
Well, it's a restaurant with a good name and a good reputation.
And by it, do you mean Mr. Zakarian's restaurant?
Yes,
Or?
yes. We worked long and hard and spent a lot of money, even in legal fees, to get a lease signed. It was a very prime spot in the building. I actually think he made a mistake by not doing it, because I think he would have done well there. But a very prime spot in the building, and ultimately it got signed. I believe my son Don worked on it for the most part, but I haven't been involved in it almost at all.
What do you know about the lawsuit?
Well, I just know that they canceled the lease, I guess based on the fact I'm running for office, and they thought I made statements that were inflammatory.
And so here we have the examining attorney basically using Donald Trump to flesh out her own client's position. She wants Trump to confirm, if not the validity, but at the very least the basis for which her client wanted to back out of the deal.
What do you think drives the success of your hotels?
Good management and great locations and great buildings. We have great buildings, and they're in great locations, and we have very good management.
What impact do you think your political campaign has had on the success of your hotels?
And I was looking at the numbers. I said, what do you attribute this to? He said, the campaign. One example where it's actually been very positive is in Florida, Mar-a-Lago. It's had a very positive impact. The manager told me recently, he said, boy, it's the best. It is actually the best year we've ever had at Mar-a-Lago.
There have been a couple of reports that have suggested that the campaign has had a pretty strong negative impact on your hotels. I'm going to ask you to just take a look at them and see if you've seen these before. Are you familiar with the survey that's described in the Forbes article, which is marked as Exhibit 184?
No, I'm not. I've never seen. I haven't seen the article. I haven't seen the survey.
Okay. Has anyone talked to you about the survey, which
No.
apparently showed that 45% of people said they'd make a specific point of not visiting a Trump-branded hotel or golf properties over the course of the next 4 years?
No, I haven't seen it.
Previously, we saw the attorney trying to get Trump to admit or acknowledge that the reason her client wanted to back out of the deal had something to do with his inflammatory comments. And at this point in the deposition, she is now trying to get Trump to acknowledge or admit that certain properties took a hit on their business as a result of him running for office. The underlying strategy of this line of questioning is to show that some aspects of Trump's business have taken a hit as a result of him running for president and things he said on the campaign trail, which could have a negative impact on people who associate themselves with Donald Trump. Hence, to seemingly legitimize, at least from a business perspective, Zakarian's decision to try to back out of the lease. The underlying argument in business, if not in law, would be that as a result of things Donald Trump has said on the campaign trail, it has had a negative impact on his business enterprise and consequently a negative impact on people who do business with Donald Trump, so they want to get out of it now to minimize their damages. The business reality now for Zakarian was not the business situation it was when he first signed the lease, and he wants to get out because the situation has changed as a result of Donald Trump's conduct. And despite knowing exactly where opposing counsel wants to to go with the examination, Donald Trump also knows that and anticipates it and sort of preempts the argument that while it might have had a negative impact on some, it could have very well had a positive impact on others. And so if the argument is going to be one of economic damages that forced Zakarian to back out of the deal, Trump is saying, well, it might have hurt some people, but it might very well have helped Zakarian in this particular location. But there is a distinction between the business arguments and the legal arguments for attempting to back out of a lease. And any lawyer will tell you that oftentimes clients make decisions which are not justified in law, call them illegal, but they are nonetheless business decisions, and they will live with the legal consequences because the legal consequences will be less destructive than the business consequences. Zakarian's attorneys are trying to build the business decision argument to support Zakarian's decision to back out of a binding lease, and Donald Trump is saying it might not have even been a legitimate business decision. Moving on.
When did you first hear of Jeffrey Zakarian, Mr. Trump?
Actually through my son, Don, and maybe Ivanka, but through my son, Don, who said, good reputation, good restaurateur, and that they were close to signing a lease with him after a pretty long negotiation.
You hadn't heard of him until they told you we're close to having the deal done. You weren't involved earlier.
That's right.
Apart from anything you've learned in this case, what do you know about Mr. Zakarian?
Not much.
Now, throughout the deposition, we hear a lot of Donald Trump saying, I don't really know about this. Don, his son, handled the negotiations. I signed the lease, but I don't read the leases. And a lot of people saying, look how stupid Donald Trump is. He doesn't even know about his own businesses, etc., etc. Again, people have to appreciate that this is a hostile, adverse cross-examination. This is not a masterclass on YouTube. Donald Trump is not here to impress opposing counsel with his business acumen. He's not here to impress the people on YouTube who are going to be watching this video afterwards. What is clear from this deposition is that Donald Trump is not the most appropriate or the best witness to be deposing on the substance of the lawsuit. True, he may be the CEO, the brand name, the head of the Trump organization, but that doesn't mean he knows the nitty-gritty of the details of this lease. It doesn't mean he knows the nitty-gritty of the negotiations of this lease. And there is nothing to be benefited from him offering information that his son or daughter would be better suited to offer. So while some might see this as Donald Trump being stupid, others might see it as him just not offering more information than he has to offer given his role in this lawsuit. And I've got to tell you, as an attorney from a legal perspective, this is what you want out of a witness. You don't want a witness thinking he's going to impress opposing counsel by showing off everything he knows in the file, even to questions he wasn't asked.
So your son Donald, I think you told me a few minutes ago, told you about conversations with Mr. Zakarian, or his, if I say Mr. Zakarian, you understand that the lease is with an entity.
Right. Sure.
His entity, in the same way that your lease is a Trump entity.
Okay.
Did you have any understanding about the key business points in the lease negotiations?
No, I didn't.
So they said, we just signed a lease and we have a deal?
Don did. He told me when they signed the lease. I don't know when that was, but it was a while ago. But he told me we have a signed lease for the restaurant.
Do you remember whether it had a guarantee, whether there was a letter of credit?
He told me there was a letter of credit. I think he told me there was a guarantee. I think this was a while ago, he discussed a couple of the points of the deal. Mm-hmm. And most importantly, he said a good quality person. But the guarantee, yeah, it's important, and it's pretty standard. I think it's it's a negotiated point, but it's pretty standard.
Mm-hmm. And why is it important to you?
I want to make sure, you mean the guarantee of the rent?
Right.
I want to make sure I get my rent.
Now here, forget about the deposition, forget about the lawsuit, forget about the fact that this is the future president of the United States currently being deposed. Here we have very interesting information on commercial leases in general. Zakarian's attorney is asking Donald Trump about the key essential elements of the lease, that being a guarantee or a letter of credit. What does that actually mean? Now, Zakarian can be a world-renowned master chef, he can be an amazing restaurateur, but chances are he is signing this lease for the restaurant with a shell company, or at the very least, a new company. Chances are it is not Jeffrey Zakarian who is signing the lease in his personal name. And so you're going to have a tenant in one of these Trump developments, which is going to be a new company with no assets, nothing to guarantee its obligations under the lease. And so what would any reasonably responsible, competent landlord or developer want in a lease that they're signing with a company that has no assets? They would want a guarantee or a letter of credit. A guarantee, letter of credit, security, they would want someone who they know has assets to guarantee the obligations under the lease to sign on to guarantee that lease with the company that has no assets. As a landlord, it's an essential, if not basic element of a lease. You need to have a guarantee for the obligations of the tenant if the tenant has no assets. assets. But as the tenant, or at least the principal of the tenant, you don't necessarily want to oblige yourself towards the landlord for all of the obligations of the tenant under the lease. And it's a question of negotiation and the respective power of the parties. I have represented tenants where I said my tenant is going to be so value added to your business, to your building as a whole, that they are not by any means going to sign on with any form of personal guarantee or security. Just having their name associated with your building is going to bring value to your building, and they are not signing a personal guarantee or a letter of credit to guarantee the obligations of the tenant. Other times, and you have to know how to negotiate from a position of weakness, you don't necessarily have a tenant that carries that sort of pull, and you have to negotiate the terms of that guarantee. That was the interesting lesson of law from this entire section of the deposition. Let's just get back to the rest of it.
And did you focus on the fact that this was a lease deal instead of a management deal?
Yes, he told me it was a lease deal instead.
Was that significant to you?
Yes.
Why?
I'd rather have a lease deal.
Why?
It's a better deal.
Why?
Because they pay rent and it's assured, as opposed to a management deal, which you never know how it's going to work out.
What do you mean you never know how it's going to work out?
You don't. I mean, a management deal, you never know how it's going to work out. Whereas a rent, you know what your rent is. That's why the combination of a rent and a guarantee is a good deal if you can make it.
I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm having trouble understanding your answer. When you say a management deal, you never know how it's going to work out. What do you mean?
Well, if you do good business, that's fine. But with a management deal, if you do bad business, you don't do well.
And the lease versus a management deal is also a very interesting thing. A lot of master chefs don't need or even want to sign leases. What they want to do is sign management agreements. And that basically means that they manage a restaurant that somebody else owns. How it might materialize in this particular case, well, Zakarian says, I don't want to open a restaurant there, but I will sign a management agreement for that restaurant so you can put my name on that restaurant. Who would actually own that restaurant? It could be a total third party. It could be the Trump administration itself. Good for Zakarian, but not quite so good for Trump, because Trump doesn't necessarily know how to operate a restaurant. So while a management contract might be better for Zakarian, it wouldn't be good for Trump, and now it's a question of who has the greater push and pull in the context of negotiations. But it is a very interesting distinction to bear in mind, the risk that goes along with a lease versus a management agreement.
It was not an easy space to rent, to be honest with you. And he agreed to pay rent, and he agreed to take the responsibility of the restaurant, which is important, because we didn't want to have losses. And so this would be the rent that he's paying, less some kind of a rent that we get. I don't know that we could have gotten a rent.
And here we have what I think might be the only substantive admission in this entire deposition from a legal perspective. It may be a substantive admission, but it might have zero legal impact. In the beginning of the deposition, Trump was saying how this was a prime spot, it was going to be great for a restaurant, and that's why they wanted a great restaurateur to have it. Almost an hour into the deposition, he now admits that it was in fact a difficult spot to rent. And this might explain why the Trump side is fighting tooth and nail to keep Zakarian bound by this lease. If it was in fact a hard location to rent, and they in fact ended up with a master chef and American restaurateur, Jeffrey Zakarian, they might not want to let him off because they might not be able to find someone to fill that spot. But while that might be something of an admission of intentions, it's not necessarily a substantive one. It's almost to be expected. When you have a good lease, you don't want to lose that good lease. And whether or not it was hard to lease that spot, and maybe in fact even more difficult to lease it if that lease is in fact broken, it doesn't change the fact that in law you might not necessarily be able to cancel your lease just because of the things that the president said in different circumstances.
Apart from what the lease says, whatever the lease says, do you understand that you can't then go and just interfere in some way with the tenant's right and obligation to open and profit from a successful restaurant?
Objection calls for a legal opinion.
I just don't know. I mean, we're not interfering. We didn't interfere. We gave him the premises. He chose not to take the premises, and, so I mean, I haven't interfered with him.
Is it your understanding as a business person that you could go and announce outside Mr. Zakarian's restaurant that he's a terrible chef?
Objection.
I think I could do that, actually. I mean, if he, let's say he was doing a bad job, let's say he opened a restaurant, he wasn't doing a good job, and somebody asked me, I think I could probably say I didn't like his restaurant. That doesn't mean I'm right or wrong, but I could probably say that, and he could counter me, but he'd still be paying his rent.
Do you think that you could go stand outside his restaurant and say, you'll get food poisoning if you eat here, don't eat here?
Objection.
Probably could say that, but I wouldn't say that, but I probably could say that.
And when you say you could say that, you could say it without violating any duties under the lease?
I don't know what the lease
Objection calls
says.
for legal opinion. Also calls for speculation.
And here we have an entire line of questioning of purely hypothetical questions, and I love the fact that Donald Trump insists on answering questions notwithstanding the objection of his attorneys. I imagine that the system is something like the system in Quebec, where even if there is an objection, if the objection is based on relevance, the witness nonetheless has to answer under reserve of the objection as formulated. But it is kind of funny to see Donald Trump sort of shush his attorney and say, I'm going to answer it anyhow, I don't care about your objection. But here we have an entire line of hypothetical questions as to what Trump might have been able to do under different circumstances, would he have been allowed to do this, etc., etc. All hypothetical questions that are not legitimate legal questions. We know what the lawyer is going after here. She's trying to get Donald Trump to admit that he would not have the right to maliciously interfere with the business of his tenants without his tenants having the right to cancel that lease. Okay, true, nobody's denying that. Having a landlord maliciously interfere with the business of his clients is a totally different set of circumstances. We can anticipate that the lawyer is probably going to try to make something of an argument by analogy that the comments Trump made while on the campaign trail, those controversial comments, are the same as malicious interference with the business of his tenants. While we can anticipate that that's where the lawyer is going to go, I don't think many people are going to be convinced by that argument. The weaker of the arguments in law that we know the lawyer is also going to make, let's just take for granted that the comments Trump made were objectively offensive. The question then would be, does a tenant have the right to cancel a lease with a landlord who says things that are objectively offensive? I would be very skeptical of that argument succeeding in law. Let's just take a hypothetical. Assume Roseanne Barr owned a shopping center. Would her tenants have the right to cancel their leases because of that tweet she posted to Twitter? I think most of us would agree in that situation, no, and it really would have something to do with the proximity of the offensive remarks to the business of the tenant.
With respect to the speech that you made, and specifically the focus on Mexicans and immigrants, did you write the statement in advance? Was it written?
No.
And did you plan in advance what you were going to say?
Yes.
And what was your understanding of the reason for Univision terminating the relationship with you?
I guess they didn't like my comments. I think they made a mistake. I think they feel they might have made a mistake, but you'll have to ask them.
And while we just saw what I think was the only admission in law that came out of this deposition that might be able to be used against Donald Trump, now we just got the soundbite that we know the media was looking for. Donald Trump planned his offensive comments in advance. It was not an off-the-cuff thing. I think this admission has zero impact in law as relates to the case, but you know the media is going to run with it, and they did. This was the best 3-second soundbite they got out of this entire deposition. So that's it. The fact that we really didn't hear all that much about this deposition is the proof that there were very few bombshells in it. There were very few bombshells in it because you're not dealing with a Justin Bieber or a Lil Wayne, you're dealing with Donald Trump, who is sort of used to this industry. The fact that he was sitting there with crossed arms, hunched over, and he was not such a big mouth as he is on the campaign trail is irrelevant. It's almost an asset for the witness being deposed. But it's nonetheless interesting to watch from a legal perspective, and it actually offers some insight into the negotiations between landlord and tenants. So even though we didn't get any dramatic career-ending soundbites, at the very least we learned something about business. And with that said, if you like my videos and you like my content, please be sure to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, drop a comment in the comment section below. It feeds the algorithm. It's actually getting extremely hot in this car, even though it's pretty chilly outside, so I'm going to step out and dry the sweat off my head if you can see it. Take care of yourselves. These are very stressful times, but I do think they will be over sooner than later, and now you know your vlog. Peace out.